The crystal glass clinked against the spoon, silencing the room. My father, Richard, raised his scotch high. To my son, Caleb, the sole heir to the entire $18 million Lake Tahoe estate. 50 people cheered. My brother soaked it up like a king. I stood in the shadow of the bookshelf, holding a single manila envelope against my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a cold, sharp curve of my lips. I locked eyes with Marcus, the family attorney, and spoke 4 words that froze the room. "You really don't know, do you?" My father turned, his face purple. "No." "What?" Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and why my brother's face went from smug to ghostly white in 3 seconds, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this story travels. My name is Valerie. I'm 29, and for the last decade, I haven't really been a person to these people. I've been a high-functioning asset, a property management algorithm with a pulse. While the room stared at me, waiting for an explanation, I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel the weight of it, because before I burned their kingdom down, I needed to remember exactly who built it. For 10 years, I ran the Lake Tahoe estate. I didn't just manage it, I breathed life into it. I spent 80-hour weeks fighting with city council members over zoning permits for the boathouse. I negotiated with contractors who tried to overcharge us by 40% because they saw a wealthy family name on the check. I was the one waking up at 3 in the morning when a pipe burst in the guest lodge, standing ankle-deep in freezing water while my father slept soundly in the main house. And Caleb? My brother spent those 10 years on what my father called business trips. We all knew what they were. They were benders in Vegas, ski trips in Aspen, and long weekends in Cabo recovering from the stress of being the heir apparent. He couldn't tell a lease agreement from a lunch menu. Yet every time a project finished on time and under budget, thanks to me, Richard would clap him on the back and say, "Good work, son. You're building a legacy." They thought they were using me. They thought I was the obedient little spare, desperate for a scrap of approval. But they didn't realize that while I was fixing their toilets and balancing their books, I was also learning where the bodies were buried. I was learning the codes, the laws, and the loopholes. They broke me down back then, made me feel small. But today, I'm the one holding the hammer. The breaking point happened exactly 7 days ago. I had walked into Richard's study with a stack of financial reports. The estate had just cleared its most profitable quarter ever, entirely due to a restructuring plan I had designed. I sat down and finally asked for what I deserved. I didn't ask for the whole pie. I asked for 10% equity. A tiny sliver of ownership to acknowledge that I was the engine keeping his luxury life running. Richard didn't just say no. He looked at me with genuine confusion, as if his toaster had just asked for a salary. "Equity?" He laughed, pouring himself a drink. "Valerie, you don't get equity. You get a roof over your head." "I do the work, Dad," I said, my voice shaking in a way I hated. "Caleb does nothing. I built this value. I earned a share." That was when the mask slipped. He slammed his glass down, the liquid sloshing over his hand. You earned nothing. I fed you for 18 years. I put clothes on your back. I paid for your braces. You think that was free?" He walked around the desk, leaning into my face, his eyes cold and dead. "You aren't a partner, Valerie. You are my investment. I poured money into you, so you could be useful to this family. You don't get dividends from the company. You are the company's equipment. Do not confuse your function with your worth." I stood there, feeling my soul turn to ice. That was the moment. That was the narcissistic mathematics that ruled my life. To him, I wasn't a child to be loved. I was a debt that could never be repaid. I was an appliance that had started making noise. I walked out of his study without saying a word. He thought he had put me in my place. He thought I went to my room to cry. Instead, I went to my office, opened the safe, and took out the manila envelope I had been hiding for 3 years. He wanted an investment return? Fine. I was about to cash out. Being the spare isn't just about being second best. It's about being an insurance policy that no one wants to pay the premium on. You exist solely to be used in case of emergency, and then shoved back into the closet when the crisis is over. For the last 3 years, I lived in that closet. I watched my brother, Caleb, treat the business I built like his personal ATM. He didn't just spend money, he incinerated it. There was the time he invested $50,000 in a crypto scheme run by a guy he met at a blackjack table in Reno. When the money vanished, Richard didn't get angry. He just called me into his office and told me to move some numbers around to cover it. He said Caleb was a visionary who took risks. He said I was too risk-averse to understand high-level finance. I didn't argue. I moved the numbers. But I also made a copy of the transaction. I logged the date, the time, and the IP address. Then there was the summer gala 2 years ago. Caleb was supposed to secure the catering permits. He forgot, of course, because he was busy on a yacht in the Mediterranean. 2 days before the event, the city threatened to shut us down. I spent 48 hours straight at City Hall, calling in every favor I had, bribing clerks with donuts and charm, and rewriting the safety protocols by hand. I saved the event. At the dinner that night, Richard raised a glass. To Caleb, he said, beaming, for pulling off the event of the season. Caleb grinned, swirling his wine. It was nothing, Dad. Just takes a little charisma. Then he looked at me, sitting at the far end of the table in my work clothes, eyes burning from lack of sleep. You look tired, Val. Maybe you should get some rest. Let the big dogs handle the celebration. The whole table laughed. My cousins, my aunts, the investors. They looked at me with that pitying smile people reserve for the help. They saw a tired, frumpy girl with a spreadsheet addiction. They mocked my binders. They rolled their eyes at my obsession with receipts. They laughed at me then. But they didn't know that those spreadsheets were the shovel I was using to dig their graves. They didn't know that every time they dismissed me, I was documenting a felony. Every time Caleb forged a signature, I archived it. Every time Richard moved assets to hide them from the IRS, I saved the file. They thought I was keeping the books to save them. I was keeping the books to bury them. I sat there at that table, sipping my water, and I realized something that changed everything. They didn't hate me. Hate requires respect. You hate an enemy. They just didn't see me. I was the furniture. I was the Wi-Fi router. I was necessary infrastructure. Completely invisible until I stopped working. And that was their fatal mistake. Because when you treat someone like a piece of equipment, you forget that equipment has no loyalty. You forget that if you push a machine too hard, it doesn't cry. It doesn't beg for mercy. It just breaks. And when it breaks, it takes the whole factory down with it. Back in the living room, the applause for Caleb finally died down. My father looked at me, annoyed that I had interrupted his moment. He thought I was about to make a scene about fairness. He thought I was going to cry about equity again. He had no idea that the equity was already gone. I took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under my heels. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hand, dense with the weight of 3 years of silence. I looked at Caleb. He was smirking. That same arrogant tilt of the head he'd had since we were kids. He thought he had won. He thought the crown was already on his head. He didn't know it was made of paper. And he didn't know I was holding the match. Caleb peeled himself away from a group of adoring socialites and sauntered over to where I was standing. He smelled like 18-year-old scotch and unearned confidence. He leaned against the bookshelf, swirling his glass, looking at me with that half-lidded, pitying expression he reserved for the help. "Don't look so sour, Val," he said, his voice low enough that the guests nearby wouldn't hear the venom. "Someone has to lose for someone else to win. That's just capitalism." "You haven't won anything, Caleb," I said, keeping my voice level. "You were handed a prize you didn't earn." He laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "Earned? Who cares about earned? Possession is 9/10 of the law, and as of 5 minutes ago, I possess everything." He gestured grandly to the room. The lake view, the expensive art. I'm already making changes. Big vision stuff. Starting with the guest cottage. My stomach tightened. The guest cottage wasn't empty. "What about the cottage?" "I cleared it out this morning," he said casually, taking a sip of his drink. "I'm turning it into a VIP lounge. Poker tables, humidors, the works. Needed the space for the after-party tonight. Cleared it out?" I stared at him. "Caleb, Mrs. Higgins lives there." Mrs. Higgins was Grandma Eleanor's best friend. She was 82 years old, frail, and terrified of change. Grandma had promised her a home for life. I had been the one ensuring her heat worked, bringing her groceries, and making sure she felt safe. "Not anymore," Caleb shrugged. "I told her to pack her bags. Sent a couple of the guys to help her move her junk to the Motel 6 off the highway. She was crying, making a scene. Pathetic. Really. But you can't let sentimentality get in the way of asset optimization." I felt the blood drain from my face. He didn't just evict a tenant. He evicted a dying woman who was basically family, just so he could have a place to smoke cigars with his degenerate friends. He didn't even wait for the ink to dry. He did it this morning, before he even officially owned the place. "She's 82, I whispered. "You put an 82-year-old woman in a motel?" "I cut the dead weight, Valerie. Which brings me to you." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Dad and I had a talk. We don't need a property manager anymore. I've got friends who can handle the books. And let's be honest, it's not like you have anything else going on. No husband, no kids, no legacy. You're a genetic dead end." He poked a finger into my shoulder. "So here's the deal. You can stay in your little apartment over the garage for a month while you look for a job. But tonight, Your staff. Go grab a broom and clean up the spilled champagne in the hallway. Make yourself useful for once. He winked at me, turned on his heel, and walked back toward the crowd, high-fiving a cousin as he went. I watched him go. I watched the way he strutted, the way he owned the room, the way he thought he was untouchable. He had just crossed the final line. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about the disrespect. It was about Mrs. Higgins shivering in a motel room because this monster wanted a poker lounge. He wanted me to be useful? He wanted me to clean up the mess? Fine. I would clean it up. I would scrub this entire family clean until there was nothing left but the truth. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. The seal was still unbroken. I ran my thumb under the flap and tore it open. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. It was time to go to work. I walked to the center of the room, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the hardwood floor. Caleb was laughing with a group of investors, already spending money he didn't have. Richard was accepting congratulations from the mayor. They looked so secure, so invincible. "Excuse me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chatter like a knife. "Before we continue the celebration, there's a small administrative matter we need to clear up." Richard turned, his smile tight. "Valerie, not now. We're in the middle of a toast." "It's about the deeds," I said, holding up the envelope. "Specifically, the ownership of the Lake Tahoe portfolio." Caleb rolled his eyes. "Give it a rest, Val. Dad already announced it. I own everything. Get over it." "Actually," I said, opening the envelope and pulling out a stack of documents. "You don't." I walked over to the nearest table, moved a tray of expensive hors d'oeuvres, and laid the papers out, one by one. The deed to the main house, the deed to the guest lodge, the deeds to the 3 rental properties on the North Shore. "These are the original deeds," I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room. "Recorded with the county clerk. Not yesterday. Not last week. 3 years ago." Marcus, the family lawyer, frowned and stepped forward. He picked up the first document, adjusting his glasses. He scanned the recording stamp, the date, the signature. His face went pale. He looked at the next one. And the next. "Richard," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "These are real. These were recorded 3 years ago." "What are you talking about?" Richard snapped, snatching the paper from him. "That's impossible. My mother left everything to me. Grandma Eleanor didn't trust you." "Dad," I said. "She knew you'd give everything to Caleb, and she knew Caleb would destroy it in a year. So 3 years ago, on her deathbed, she transferred the entire estate into a trust. A trust managed solely by me." The room went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "I have been the landlord for 3 years," I continued, looking directly at Caleb. "Every lease agreement, signed by me. Every contractor payment, authorized by me. And the rent? The rent didn't go into the family account. It went into a shadow account I set up to pay off the debts Caleb was secretly racking up." I pulled out another sheet of paper, a ledger. "Gambling debts in Vegas. The settlement for the car crash in Reno. The investment in that crypto scam. I paid it all. I let you play rich while I cleaned up your mess." Caleb's face was a mask of shock. You stole my money?" "I saved your ass," I corrected him. "But I'm done saving it. As of this morning, I have dissolved the shadow account. The free ride is over." I reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I walked over to Caleb and slapped it against his chest. "And this," I said, "is an eviction notice. Not for Mrs. Higgins, for you." Richard was sputtering, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Why?" he screamed, echoing his earlier outburst. "Why did you wait? Why did you let us humiliate ourselves for 3 years? I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. "Because I knew you," I said. "I knew if I told you the truth, you would have guilt-tripped me. You would have sued me. You would have bullied me. Until I signed it back over. I had to wait until you made your move. I had to wait until you claimed ownership publicly, in front of all these witnesses, so that when I revealed the truth, you would have nowhere to hide." I looked around the room at the stunned guests. "I let you build your castle on quicksand, Dad. Specifically so I could watch it sink. It was a Trojan horse. I had carried the truth inside their walls for 3 years, waiting for the exact moment they tried to erase me. And now, the walls were coming down." Caleb stared at the eviction notice, his hands shaking. Then, a strange, desperate laugh bubbled out of his throat. He reached into his jacket pocket. "You think you're so smart," he sneered, his eyes wild. "But you forgot one thing." He pulled out a folded document. Grandma signed a power of attorney 2 days before she died. It gives me control over all assets, real estate, and trusts. It overrides your little trust. It overrides everything. He held it up like a weapon. I win. For a moment, the room froze. Richard relaxed. Marcus hesitated. It looked like I had lost, but I wasn't worried. I knew exactly where Grandma was 2 days before she died. And I had proof. Caleb waved a document like a trophy. Power of attorney, he sneered. Durable. Immediate. Signed October 14th, 2 days before she died. Richard exhaled in relief. She knew who the real heir was, he said, glaring at me. Marcus studied the page. The signature appears valid, he said carefully. If this holds, it overrides the trust. Caleb stepped closer, smiling. So pack your bags. You're trespassing. I didn't look at him. I looked at the date. October 14th, I said calmly. Are you sure? I handed Marcus a hospital file. Grandma's ICU records. Turn to October 14th. Marcus read. His face drained. She was intubated, he said. Sedated. In a medically induced coma. Physically restrained. I met Caleb's eyes. She couldn't sign anything. The silence turned dangerous. You didn't just lose the house, I said evenly. You presented a forged legal document to an attorney in front of 50 witnesses. That's felony fraud. Marcus dropped the document. I can't be part of this, he said. Richard, this is criminal. Richard stared at his son. What did you do? Caleb panicked. And then he confessed. I used the forgery, he gasped. I have private debts, $500,000. I gave them the house as collateral. They're coming at 5. I checked my watch. 4:45 p.m. Richard grabbed me. You have to sign it. He's your brother. I pulled away. I don't owe you anything. And I'm done paying for Caleb's sins. I opened the door. You invited them, I said. This is your deal. As I drove away, black SUVs turned into the driveway. I didn't call my family. I called the police. The house was seized. Caleb went to prison. Richard lost everything. Now I live in a small apartment, with a lease in my name. The wine tastes like freedom. I stopped trying to save people who were willing to burn me to stay warm. If you've ever had to choose between saving your family and saving yourself, you're not alone.